Thank you for coming back.
Did you have doubts?
No, I'm so glad that you all are here this morning. We still have our overflow room. No, we were very close yesterday. I do want to thank Mary Hines for organizing our trip yesterday, and the rain held off. It stopped before we actually held out. It was multimodal and very interesting. The view from the observation, is it observation tower?
It's called the observation deck at the corporate executive board.
So,
Memorable name.
so it was, yes. But for those of you who may not have experienced that before, the views were stunning. So anyway, thank you very much for organizing that and everybody who helped to make that possible. And thank you, Mr. Kastowitz, for bringing us up to your urban region.
It was a pleasure.
Mr. Urban at Large. So anyway, it was great. Thank you very much. We are going to continue with the work session from yesterday, and I believe those are going over the WMATA guidelines with Director Mitchell.
I poured you some water just so you know it's
Everybody walks sideways in this room.
And in your packets, I don't see it pulled up here, but that's okay. So the purpose of my presentation today was just to alert you to the draft resolution that is in the packet of information and has also been posted on the website. And let's see. Since you don't have it up, I did want to just highlight a couple things. And as you may recall, I gave you a PowerPoint presentation last month. And the PowerPoint presentation actually summarized exactly everything that's in this resolution. And again, this is the guidelines that the CTB will be utilizing to potentially review any withholding actions in the future, but also it discusses the implementation of the WMATA-related reforms that are in the legislation for this year. So we have presented this, or provided a draft of this to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and as a reminder, that's the group of Northern Virginia localities that are members of the WMATA Compact, and they would be most affected by any actions by the CTB that fall under this policy. That group is reviewing this right now. We expect to get some feedback from them later in July. However, this has been developed with quite a bit of input from the localities as well. But just to, again, remind you of the items in here that are addressed in the, from the legislation. It discusses how the CTB would withhold 20% of the funds available if any alternate directors participate or take action at an official WMATA board meeting, and the guidelines goes through some specifics about what that would entail. It also discusses the withholding related to whether or not WMATA has adopted a detailed capital improvement plan covering the current fiscal year and at a minimum the next 5 fiscal years. So that is also outlined in more detail in these guidelines. And then the requirement that if any operating assistance from the Virginia localities increases by more than 3% over the prior year's operating assistant, that could also trigger withholding. And that is probably where the most detail is in these guidelines, because it is probably the most complicated of all of the provisions to calculate. And just a few things to highlight that are in there. Anything that would not be included in this calculation is any service equipment or facility that's required by applicable law, rule, or regulation. It discusses capital projects that were approved by the WMATA board before or after the effective date of this provision. And this goes into some detail about the types of capital projects that would when there are operating impacts related to a capital project, that not be counted against the subsidy increase. This does include some detail along those lines. Anything that's related to a capital project it has a state of good repair purpose. Operating subsidies that are related to service disruptions caused by implementation of capital projects. So for example, when we have additional operating costs that are due to the Safe Track program when they have to shut down lines, and as you know, there's going to be a number of line closures over the next 3 years, that because of the need and the importance of those mitigation requirements, that those would not also be counted against the subsidy impacts. Payments or obligations arising from or related to legal disputes or proceedings between or among WMATA and any other person or entity would not be included. Operating subsidies for specific WMATA transit services that are 100% funded by a single WMATA member jurisdiction. And there are a number of cases, particularly with some bus service, or capital projects that are called reimbursable projects, where a single jurisdiction may pick up 100% of the cost for those because it's something that has a specific benefit to their jurisdiction. And so in that case, again, that would not count against the subsidy. And then regularly scheduled adjustments of the subsidy allocation formulas by WMATA. As you may know, there's a formula that describes how operating costs are distributed among all the jurisdictions. That gets updated every several years as new population information is available. As the system changes, it's based on how much system users are in each jurisdiction. As that information gets updated, it may impact, particularly as we tend to see more and more growth of the WMATA system occurring in Virginia, that type of impact of those kind of inputs would not count against the subsidy increases as well. It does also include a provision that would allow the WMATA board to take actions that would mitigate an impact to their operating subsidy if the CTB did find that the subsidy increase exceeded the 3% threshold. They could take actions that would then release the funding back to that jurisdiction, those jurisdictions as well. So this again will be coming before you in September for a final vote. We do expect that we may get some more comments from the Northern Virginia jurisdictions, as I mentioned before, at the end of July. If there are any additional changes, we will modify this and make sure that it's available to all of you and post it in a public place. And if you have any further questions, I'm happy to take those.
Questions, Ms. Hines?
I actually don't have a question. I just really want to say thank you, Jennifer. This has been really complicated. The legislation had a lot of areas that needed to be paid attention to, and I think the way that you have worked collaboratively with the jurisdictions to sort of provide us a better, more clearly defined way to judge these things has, I hope, put us in a spot where we're going to be able to move forward collaboratively and continue to fund WMATA. As somebody who's spent a lot of time thinking about this, I think you guys have done an excellent job, and I really do want to commend you and the MVTC for the work that went into this. So thanks.
Thank you. I can't take credit. There's a lot of staff who had a lot of input into this. I do want to also mention a comment that Mr. Whitworth made last time about how this is going to occur. This does include some description of how WMATA needs to provide certifications to the CTB by July 1st of every year that addresses the specifics of these provisions. As in addition to that, if there's any changes or anything that occurs throughout the course of the year, particularly related to the governance provisions, they're also required to notify us immediately of that as well. And then as far as the 3% withholding requirements, or the 3% subsidy requirements, it does also require WMATA to provide us with a explanation of that operating subsidy increase, including any items that they may have disallowed or taken out of the calculation under these provisions, so that we can review those and agree on those before any action is taken. So there's a process also addressed in here too. So,
Thank you for addressing that.
sure.
Any other thoughts or comments, questions? Okay.
Great, thank you.
I will just say thank you. I appreciate too Ms. Hines' comments about recognizing that this was a complicated process, and to you and your staff and the collaborative work with MVTC I think was really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So we go into the action meeting. The district engineer would like to address the plan. Should I go into action or do that now? Okay. Okay, at this point, we're going to move into the action meeting of the CTB, and I would like to open that by inviting Helen Cuervo, who is District Engineer from the Northern Virginia District, and just thank you for allowing us and kind of sharing the district and information about
Absolutely.
being here.
It's our pleasure. And we hope you enjoyed the beautiful city of Alexandria. It's a gorgeous city, and we are very thankful that it has a bright and thriving economy as well as the rest of Northern Virginia. But for us to keep that humming, we have to do a lot with transportation, and we have to use every mode possible. We have great partners like Fairfax County. We have Tom Bashadney here, but City of Alexandria, we have Loudoun and Prince William and Arlington as well that work side by side with us to improve all of the networks to help get our folks from point A to B in the least amount of time. And that can be walking, which is truly a way people go to work up in this region. That may be unusual, but they walk, they might hike, they might bike, they carpool, they slug, they vanpool, they take a bus, they take the metro, and they take the highway systems. So it takes all of us working together to get that done. We have great partners in the NVTA and the NVTC, and coming up with new bus routes, coming up with new opportunities for folks to get to where they need to go. So this economy keeps thriving, keeps growing, and so we really appreciate all that partnership. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and that's our motto in Northern Virginia. A lot of things came out of Northern Virginia based on pressures to resolve issues, and so in the 80s, we started ramp metering, and we started the first SSP, Safety Service Patrol and Talk Center, because we opened the HOV lanes. So we initiated that in the 80s. In the 90s, we started our Customer Service Center with 2.4 million citizens. That's a lot of calls. In a snowstorm a couple years ago, we had over 30,000 calls. I only have 800 employees, and they don't all answer the phone for snow. So we really, really have to get ahead of the game and come up with ways and strategies to serve our customers. Development's growing like crazy, and was back in the 90s. We developed a land use permit program that's still in use today. It's a program that helps us develop and push through those permits. We also came up with a lane closure program. Any given time on a summer day, we have 150 lane closures in this region. And so that we don't have someone closing the right lane on 95 and someone closing the left lane, we make sure that we have that turned in and that's sorted out before that happens. We also had a need to quickly get things on the ground. And so we began our design build program in the 90s. We also worked on road diets, which was converting some roads to allow more of the bicyclists to get on the road, that there were less traffic on the road, more bicyclists could use that. And then we also started the instant tow. Many of these have gone statewide from our initiatives. In 2010, we worked on automated vehicles locators on our snow equipment. We went from 1,000 vehicles supporting us to over 4,000. So with 800 people, there's no way we can watch that many folks all at once. We have monitors that follow them, but we really felt like we needed to have something more just to make sure, number one, that they're working in Northern Virginia, number two, that they're moving. And so the AVL system was a tremendous asset to us to really start to keep an eye on our equipment, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And we have that on all of our equipment now, and that is also going to be a statewide initiative. In 2013, we started working with connected vehicles, and we had the first test bed out on the roads, on the primaries, 29, 66, and several roads in our region, working with the auto industry to start being able to develop that technology. In 2015, we tried the advanced traffic management system on 66 to fully use what we had. It also gave warning when there were accidents, what lane people should be in, but also allowed us to fully use the shoulder lane. So we are very excited about that. Currently, we're looking at signals. We're doing providing all of our signal timings into smart roads, so people who want to build apps, people that are smarter than us in building apps, can do that and help our citizens get to where they need to go much more quickly. And we are currently working with an Israeli company called No Traffic, looking at some signal intelligence at signals where it actually has radar and it reads all 4 quadrants an extensive direction in each way, and it will modify the signal timing of the greens to be perfect for that signal. So we're very excited about that. But we are often on the cutting edge, and we bleed a little bit, but we recover and we try to provide the best service possible, and technology is certainly a great asset to us. But I welcome you to our region, and we thank you for coming up and enjoying Alexandria.
Thank you very much. Thank you to your team. I always appreciate being here. We had a great groundbreaking just a couple weeks ago here for the eastbound lane on I-66 inside, and Renee Hamilton, just thank you for all of your help and guidance. And Mary Hines was there to kind of to join a small group of us in acknowledging how important that that whole corridor is to Virginia. So with that, let's see. Yes, and I was checking on, we do have a timer. We'll move into the public comment period of the action meeting, and I have one person signed up, but of course, you know, we will invite people, anyone who would like to speak. You do have 3 minutes to make your comments. There's the timer. And what's really hard, and I always say this, it's very challenging for me because during the public comment period, we do not respond. It's really our opportunity to listen, and and it's really challenging for me not to try to answer your question immediately. So with that, I have Mr. Whitfield signed up. Good morning, Mr. Whitfield. How are you?
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the CTB. I'm Rob Whitfield with the Fairfax County Taxpayers Alliance and also with the Committee for Dulles for 20 years. In the last 25 years, I've been to over 5,000 transportation and land use meetings. And so I look at it from multiple perspectives. I've attended over 200 Airport Authority meetings, board meetings committee, and over 60 WMATA committee and board committee meetings. And so I see the good, bad, and the ugly. And so first to Helen, thank you for the road resurfacing crews who are doing a good job in Reston, and to your safety patrols who are always welcome on our roads. I don't know which challenge is it. First, this room and the fact that we have so few people here it doesn't do well for the CTB. You're only up here once this year, and the fact that we have very few people from the public doesn't help you do your outreach and communications. I don't know how you should better do that, but I do think that you should consider having some kind of citizens advisory committee to help you interface with the regions. Obviously, in places like Fairfax County, we have transportation advisory boards and so on. But it's pretty sad when I'm the only speaker at the annual public input at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and the authority. It means that there's something not right in the communication process. And I'm not an expert at communications. I just tell you what I see. So the result is that a lot of information doesn't filter out. Tom Bashadney was with a meeting us in Reston last night, and also in the morning with the County Transportation Board. We face huge challenges in the Dulles corridor because the employment is growing rapidly, and the earliest we can expect transportation improvements is a decade from now. I don't know what funding formula alternatives have to be made, and I will only suggest that I'm available to help work with others. And obviously the upcoming WMATA strategic plan, we need a public outreach. I've been asking for that from this board under the prior transportation secretary. It needs to have public input as well as public officials. I heard Jennifer remarks. I haven't seen what she put out, and so it doesn't help that you guys can make decisions, but the public at large who pay the taxes need to understand some of the issues to be decided. So I will be glad to provide input, and thanks again for coming to Northern Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I'm Tom Bashadney. I'm the Director of Fairfax County's Department of Transportation, and I also want to welcome you here to Northern Virginia today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning about the Route 7 project from from Reston into the Tysons Corner area. This is a very critical project for Fairfax County, but also a very critical project for Northern Virginia. This particular stretch of roadway carries 55,000 cars a day, and it is the last segment between Leesburg and Tysons that hasn't been improved. It's a 4-lane segment. The rest of the roadway is at least a 6-lane segment. So it's the last segment to be improved in the northern part of Fairfax County. In addition to the 2 additional travel lanes, it includes shared use paths on both sides of the facility, as well as upgraded bus stops. This is one of the 17 what we call Tysons-wide improvements that have been identified to support the future growth in Tysons, which is the county's largest major activity center. The project will allow traffic to stay on Route 7 as opposed to flooding into the neighborhoods, which it does daily during the week here in Northern Virginia. It improves mobility not only for the 1.2 million people of Fairfax County, but also residents of Loudoun, Clark, Fauquier, and the city of Winchester, which combined account for another 400,000 people. VDOT and Fairfax County have worked for more than 4 years to craft this project. It has involved a lot of hand-holding with the community, all up and down Route 7. Many of these communities only have access to their communities from Route 7. So VDOT and their team in Fairfax County have been hand-holding with each of these communities along the way to make sure that the project works for them. And that has involved dozens of homeowners association meetings and even a lot of individual property meetings. No one is happy about the bids for this project, and I want to be very clear about that. But this project is vital to Fairfax County and to the future support and success of Tysons. As a result, on June 19th, the Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to add $40 million of funding to the project, contingent on the CTB also adding $40 million of funding to the project. This wasn't easy even for a county of our size, but we recognize the importance of this project and the importance of supporting Tysons and the role that the county plays as well. So, Madam Chairman, members of the CTB, I respectfully ask your approval today of the action item that will provide the additional funding for the project, and then vote to approve the design build contract later on. Finally, as my time runs out, I do want to thank Scott, Deputy Secretary Donahue, Helen Cuervo, and her staff for all of the work and the coordination that has been done on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anyone else here today would like to speak? Okay, thank you very much. I will just say that now that the public comment period is over, that Mr. Whitfield, I think your comments, you really sparked something, because of all the outreach that we do, perhaps all that information is not getting to our website. So I just want to verify, make sure that all the opportunities for outreach that we are conducting across Virginia is actually on the website. I know with just outside 66, as I was preparing my remarks, as we were doing the groundbreaking for the eastbound widening inside, checking with Northern Virginia, that just for outside 66, there were more than 350 opportunities for outreach with so many stakeholders. And that kind of outreach actually takes place all over Virginia. The Commonwealth Transportation Board, which only meets once a month, is just one single meeting. The good news is that this is streamed for anybody to access, which I also think is very important. But all that outreach, I think we need to begin to make sure, whether it's DRPT or perhaps some committee meetings, that we begin to let people know just how many opportunities and how much we want input from citizens. And I know Ms. Hines has been a big advocate for us really looking at our policies for outreach and making sure we have formal expectations for those meetings as well.
Madam Secretary, if I could just to remind everybody, we have the CTB hosts fall and spring meetings with the public, and we've been doing that very consistently. And we get, up here we get a number of people who do come to the meetings, not a lot of comment, but it's a real opportunity for people to talk to VDOT staff and also NVTA and NVTC staff about what's going on, and then share any thoughts that they have with us. So I feel like, twice a year, there's something that's called a CTB, a formal CTB meeting that happens out in Fairfax, and we slide our time to be convenient to the commuting public here in Northern Virginia. So, for a body that meets 10 times a year, we're adding 2 more times that we're out in the public. So I just want people to remember that as well.
I always just think those are the formal meetings that we have, but there's just so much public outreach for projects. I just think about yesterday with 81. We're doing 12 public hearings just on the 81 study. So, but the comment's really important to me because perhaps not people know the amount of outreach that takes place, and so I really thank you for bringing that up today. With that, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you. Ms. Pryor? Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I'm here to talk to you about Route 7. If you recall, I briefed the board last month on issues related to our expected smart scale budget increase based on the award of the Route 7 Phase 1 and 2 project. The lowest price proposal exceeded the cost estimate by $95 million. And then based on modifications to technical requirements and minor scope modifications, we anticipated an additional $80 million being required to award the project. Since I briefed you, VDOT has completed the best and final offer process with the offerers and received final price proposals that will indeed require an additional $80 million to award the project. Fairfax County, as Mr. Bashadny mentioned earlier, approved a $40 million increase from the county to contribute towards that. We are recommending funding the entire award using $40 million from the board and the $40 million from Fairfax County. The $40 million from the board would come from $13.2 million in Northern Virginia district grant funds that have been previously unallocated to projects. They were funds set aside by the district to address cost increases on existing projects. And then an additional $26.8 million in surplus high priority funds from projects statewide that have come in low for award, and so they're now surplus. We've learned several lessons as we have journeyed through this process. As I mentioned to you last month, we have extended the time for VDOT to validate and review the scope, schedule, and estimates in all of the projects being submitted for round 3. We've also added additional review. Central office, district staff will review every application that's been submitted and confirm the scope, schedule, and budget. In addition, central office, location, and design staff reviews an additional 10% of those projects and validates those as well. We will also have our central office, location, and design staff do a cursory review of all applications that have been submitted to identify any potential issues. And with that, I'll take any questions on the process and the recommendation.
Somebody lurking behind you too, Kim.
Does
She's
that.
aware of my presence.
He does that.
Is this really the only area of the state where we have had this issue, this major issue, and that just mainly due to Northern Virginia prices, I guess?
It's in part because we've got so much work out there. There were also some additional factors with this project as we briefed the board last month. A huge amount of right-of-way parcels having to be acquired. Washington Gas, a huge utility line as part of the project, has introduced a significant portion of risk. And so those are the big reasons we feel that we've gotten to this point on Route 7.
But it's really you don't see this anywhere else.
We don't see budget increases of this magnitude across the state, no, sir.
Mr. Yates, I think last meeting we discussed that there were 4 projects in totality that, upon our review, Route 7 being one of them. 2 of these other projects are in Northern Virginia, and we are in a very early stage that I think we can recover from that, from a scope size, and not have this issue. But as Ms. Pryor said, that we do have a validation process that we are implementing and are moving forward with, certainly in this next round of smart scale applications, that we will have anything valued at $50 million and above our state L&D engineer. Our first line of defense is in the district. Second line of defense is going to be certainly with our state location design engineer certifying that those estimates as they come in are accurate and true. And if we need to take it back to the locality that's submitting it, we're more than prepared to do that. So at this point in time, yes, we think that we have isolated the issue and have identified those that are in jeopardy.
Mr. Williams.
Kim, take us back. I was reading something about how the project scored originally.
Can I actually
Why
address
did I
this?
know you were going to pop?
Well, I believe last time the
You lurk.
board, Madam Chair, posed several questions about how would these projects have fared in round one if we knew.
How did it score the first time?
It scored the first time. The phase one had a score of 1.05, and phase two had a score of 1.16. They were the two lowest scoring funded projects in Northern Virginia, but as you all recall, we had around 300 applications in round one, and we funded slightly under 50%, or slightly over 50%, excuse me, of those. And so they were far from the lowest scoring projects in the Commonwealth. We had many projects that scored 0.0 something, and these scored over a 1. I would also say that at the request of several members that we spoke to in the interim between meetings, they were requesting how would these projects had scored if we had known they had this additional $40 million in cost coming from the state. Well, remember, we score based on the request from the state, so it's only $40 million from the state because the county has put in another 40. So we scored both those projects, and that means the request on phase one would have increased from $77.3 million to $103.4 million. And I'm rounding here, so there's some decimal dust that's going to be left off in these discussions. And the request on phase two would have increased from $42.3 to $56.3 million. That is a $40 million overall increase between the two. What that does to the scores of those two projects is it would lower the score of phase one from 1.053 to 0.788. On phase two, it would lower the score from 1.138 to 0.856. Two things I kind of want to put out there as factual pieces of information for the board, just as points of reference as you consider the action before you. Just taking into account those new scores, were there any projects in round one that were funded that had lower scores than either of these projects with the additional cost? And the answer is yes. There were seven projects with a total funding of about $145 million that were funded in rounds
In Northern Virginia?
in the state.
Oh, so what about Northern Virginia?
These were the two lowest scored projects. And I'm going to get to the point you're getting to in 1 second if you'll give me a little indulgence, Mr. Williams. I know exactly where you're going, and I do have your answer to that question because we talked about this. These seven projects, just to go through them, that were funded that have a lower score than one or both of these projects with the additional costs are the Warrenton Interchange, and Culpeper, the Deep Creek Bridge, the Route 58 corridor, and the Indian River Road Phase 7A and Hampton Roads, the Route 11 South Valley Pike, and the 277 Widening and Access Management in Stanton, and the Route 3 passing lanes in the Fredericksburg District. So that's just without doing anything, just understanding, are there projects that scored lower than these two with this additional cost? I think the point Mr. Williams was getting ready to ask is, well, if they had known these costs in round one and we had run all the steps that existed in round one, would they have been funded, or what would have changed?
My question is more specific. It's how many projects with a lower rating were funded in the Northern Virginia Construction District? None. None.
Yes.
So my point is, they would not have been, they wouldn't have made it.
No, sir, that is not the case. And that's what my question is, we
what I'm trying to
reran
get to.
round one with these projects with a different score, with updated score here. What happens in that instance, and I'm going to tell you the statewide impacts, because remember, it's all bubble, so if something changes in one district, then something changes in another district correspondingly. What happens is with those lower scores, two additional projects in Northern Virginia are funded, and one of these projects is not funded. So the two additional projects that would have been funded are the University Boulevard Extension with $23 million of district grant funding, Route 7 Phase 2 with now $56.3 million of district grant funding would have been funded, and then the Seven Corners Ring Road for $57 million would have been funded in that elusive Step 3 with a mix of district grant funding and high priority. That is actually more money going to Northern Virginia, if they had had these higher costs at that time, the then project that is not funded, that was funded in Route 1, would be the southbound Rappahannock River Crossing project on I-95, which was funded in Step 4. And as you remember, we kind of, in Step 4, spend the high priority money on the highest scoring projects until we don't have enough money to fund the next highest ranking project. That project cost around $115 million was the requested amount. We would have only had around $100 million available. So had we known these costs in round 1, that's how the scenario would have changed.
I want to be clear that more money would have gone to the Northern Virginia district had they been scored with the higher cost. And Route 7 was a project that the delegation, it was Gary Garzinski and Scott Kaspowitz and Mary Hine. You weren't there. So Jim Dyke was still there. But the delegation from Northern Virginia made the recommendation to move these forward.
That's correct, Madam
Phase
Secretary.
1 and Phase 2. So it was their decision to do these concurrently, Phase 1 and Phase 2. But the point I think that Mr. Donahue is trying to bring to the board, had we known the higher cost at that time, Northern Virginia would actually have more money.
And Madam Chair, at Mr. Williams' request at another moment, it would have been approximately $17 million in additional funding that would have flowed into the district.
We're down to 23 million now.
I believe it's
Even less.
ironically almost
Less.
the exact request.
My point is only,
Yes.
when the Northern Virginia delegation got together before and asked us to kind of flip the scoring because they felt the projects were more important, I certainly went along with it because they know it better than I do. And so that's kind of what we're doing here today.
Yes.
Is, let's flip the process again. I'm all right with it because I see the issues in Northern Virginia and I know how. I just wished the other districts weren't losing money to pay for it, especially as egregious as the error was. That was almost a double, wasn't it?
I believe it was approximately a 40% cost increase, but I would stress no project in the other district is being canceled
I
or
understand
losing
that,
those
but
funds because of this
but
action.
I'm sure if I called somebody in Hampton Road and said, could you use a couple $1 million, they'd be like, yes, we could flat out use it.
I'm sure there are folks in Northern
And
Virginia as well.
there's projects that they'd love to build with. So that's kind of my,
I did have one question.
Mr. Brown.
So is the,
too much for me.
just want to make sure. So is the new cost proposal inclusive of contingency?
We have, wherever you are, Gary.
Mr. Moore.
Trying to get out of the way.
It is, and I've spent more time on a project like this because of where it went than I normally do, and it kind of ran some of the wickets. The first thing that we did in going through the best and final, when I briefed you last month, I said, number one, we were optimistic on, so that's part of it. The other thing that happened is this $200 million gas line, and you're with the, that was not foreseen. That was not identified to us through the smart scale process. Otherwise, we would have built that risk in. But shortly afterwards, it came in, and it does drive the cost up. To have two major projects going in the same space, that could be, we can't discreetly pull it out, but that could be in the $30 to $40 million range because there is a cost to both companies. And I would submit that Washington Gas is doing the responsible thing in doing this at the same time because it's a very tight space and we only put the public through it once. So it's going to be higher cost for both them and us, but it's the right thing because you're in this very tight space. So from my perspective, this was part of it that was an unforeseen circumstance that probably is best value for the Commonwealth to do at the same time and just swallow that part of it. The other part is the technical requirements that I talked about, and we went in and in the BAFO reduced from our bid was about 278, 279, I think it was 278.9. It's down to just under 253. It was actually the higher cost number because it's had a higher technical score, same bidder, but we went exactly by our process. So we cut the technical requirements down, and that took that off about 26 million off the score. And then the other thing that was out there, as we said, was a tightening market, and I think that's something we're going to continue to watch because we're doing some other calculations, and for instance, paving costs are going up year over year. That's going to happen, and we're just going to have, and it's not spiking, but as the commissioner calls it, an inflection point. Right now, it's gradual, but as you get towards a mature recovery, In the 2006, 2007, we had prices going way up, and then of course they dropped. So those are the four components. We've hit the technical requirements. I think the gas problem is one that is probably in the public interest to do, and we've cut the costs as best we can. Two good companies. I mean, these are two of our, if you took the top 5 or 6 companies that operate in Virginia, they are two that when they take a job on, it's going to get done, and it's going to get done right. So I don't know if that answered maybe more than you asked for.
Well, it does. I mean, I think the concern that I'm getting at is, have we wrung it? I want to make sure we didn't wring it too tight, because these various variables are moving. You don't want to get to a point where you have to come back, right?
No.
So we want to make sure we have that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we didn't take all the contingency out of the deal.
We have reduced
in order to get to this point.
We have reduced the contingency, and we've reduced the CEI. We've gone through a drill. The other thing I've done is personally met with the CEO of the company, and our teams met Monday to also go through cost cutting, and we went through a target below our number to say, look, because if you go to try to hit the number, there's going to be right-of-way costs. I said, what is it we can do? So I believe that we are set up to work with them as a team. They're a company we've worked very strongly with in the past, and we have a number out there to get below that. I believe that we're in a good position to run this project very, very tight. And they've built, I also believe they've built enough risk into this thing that if we work this close, we can do this. This cost that we're asking is very close to some numbers we had run in 2011, and I think this is the right number. It's going to take some tough management to get below that, but we can do that.
And Madam Chair, Mr. Brown, I would also note, this isn't a design bid build contract. This is a design build contract. So it's a fixed price contract, unlike a lot of other types of work where if there are unforeseen things or certain types of delays, we're 100% responsible. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. We haven't transferred 100% of that risk under design build because it's not economical, but we do transfer a lot more risk under this type of contracting mechanism. So certain other things now will be at the risk of that contractor. So we are paying a slight premium, but we're paying that premium to kind of mitigate that risk longer term in this deal.
Secretary.
Worth.
What is the amount of the gas issue, additional amount that the gas issue came about?
I won't get a discrete number from the company because they're not going to show me their books because they have to protect themselves through a contract. If I had to guess, I'd say 30, maybe 40. I mean, because you've got along this whole 6+ mile stretch, they are in the same space. Somebody's got, and they're going, when there's a weather issue, they're going to have to deconflict the whole way. So usually it's one company in there working with just utility relocations required by the project. In this case, you've got 2 major projects going on in the same space, and that's a significant risk. That's my guess, but I couldn't pull out a discrete number.
I understand. And when did we learn that there was this issue?
I would guess 2 years and a half ago.
It was right before we were starting the RFP.
It was during the RFP. It was after Smart Scale and when we were putting out the proposal that they came to us.
So it was at that time then that we knew we were going to have possibly a $40 million deficit. Is that correct?
I don't know that we had it defined at that point, but we knew we'd have some higher risk, yes.
My point is, I think this board needs to be apprised when something comes up. That was a year or so ago. Now we're dealing with a contract that time is of the essence, I've been told. If we're going to do it, the contracts have been let. But this is a conversation we probably should have had a year ago. Do you disagree with that?
No, and that's something that I certainly could do better at, and we should do better at.
And secondly, Mr. Donahue, the 7 projects that scored lower, but that was all under the under the step 4 process that we adopted, where we allowed each of at the beginning to utilize high priority funds for their highest high priority fund project. Was that correct?
Madam Chair, Mr. Worth, that is not correct. Those 7 projects were funded either in step 1 or step 3. So that means they were either funded with district grant program or a mix of district grant program and high priority funds. Remember, round 1 had 4 steps, and round 2 we eliminated that original step 3, if you will. So in round 1, the steps were you spent the district grant money on the highest scoring projects until you couldn't fund the next highest scoring one.
Right.
Step 2 was you funded high scoring projects with high priority that were ineligible for district grant. So something submitted by an MPO, a lot of your PDCs put in acceleration and deceleration lanes in 81, for example. Step 3 was then every district got some amount of high priority money because we used the remaining district grant funds and then matched that with high priority funds.
Right, that's the step I was thinking.
Okay,
of.
I'm sorry. So yeah, step 3. And then step 4 was we spent the remaining high priority funds on the highest scoring projects after that could be funded.
Right, but, so that's how those lower scores got money through that step 3 process, is that correct?
Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, that is how
You said there were 7. I think you said there were 7.
I did, and it's a mix of that. So 4 of the 7 got the funding in step 3. 3 of them, 2 in Hampton Roads and 1 in Stanton, were actually funded in step 1.
I've had some concern about it, but let me say on the outset, I'm going to support this. But this is what troubles me. We are now making a decision, but we're not basing our decision, or we're not saying what we're basing the decision on. We're going to make a decision, we're going to vote on it, and $40 million additional money will come out of high priority surplus.
24.
27.
Yeah.
Out of surplus. And I assume that, does that use up the surplus?
I should stress, Madam Chair, we've awarded, I believe, approximately 40% of the round 1 projects. So there may be more surplus or there may be more deficit as those additional round 1 projects are awarded. But of the current surplus that is in hand, that does not use it all, I believe we have about 52 million. So it would use approximately half.
But we think and know that there are other projects throughout the state, possibly in my own, that are underestimated.
Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, I personally cannot speak to that. What
I
I would say is
understand
the
you
rule
can't,
of
but there's a
thumb.
good possibility that's the case.
I would also say this 52 million we have is because several already came in under.
Under,
So what I would
that's
say
right.
is there's a possibility of some coming in over and there's a possibility of them coming in under.
Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Whitworth, I think for where we are right now is that there is that possibility that exists out there. We are aware of 1 or 2 other projects that may be needing some additional funds, but not necessarily to the magnitude that this is. I think the high priority funding is as we have, is 52 million is what we have out there right now to be able to support other initiatives or other shortfalls that may exist. But as Mr. Donahue said, that we are on track for other projects that can come in under budget and certainly sweep that money back into the statewide pot.
With the potential of steel going up,
Yes.
and there is a good possibility we will be facing further deficits, known or unknown. Is that correct?
Yes.
So my thinking is we're going to be right back in this room having another vote down the road. And what I would like to see us do is to set forth some policy with which we make a vote. And maybe it's the total savings to the state. Maybe it's a whole bunch of things. But rather than just say, well, we got to do it, it's time to do it, we made a mistake, let's set forth the parameters upon which this board deliberates and comes to a decision, and not let this be the precedent that, well, we did it for $27 million in Northern Virginia. Hampton Roads may have something that they need. That's not the way we should go about it. We ought to have a basis upon which we come to the best decision for the state. And that's why I suggest and think we can't do it today, but I think we need to set forth those considerations that when we are back in here looking at another issue, we say, okay, these are the things we consider, and we'll do that deliberation and make the vote based on that. That's my comment.
Mr. Whitworth, if I could just follow up on some of your comments and concerns. You are correct. This is the first time that this has happened with one of our smart scale projects. And I will say to the commissioner and Mr. Moore's, when I came into this position very early on, they informed me of this issue. We met with Mr. Kaspowitz, and we tried to determine a path forward, making sure that this board was fully aware of what was taking place, and actually trying to determine what were the true economic impact of this. I've had discussions with Deputy Secretary Donahue about the fact that this is one instance. We are monitoring the other projects to determine what is our risk in the costs that have been presented to us so far. And I think you identified, something very important. There's some unknowns in this as we move forward, one being the tariffs. Secondly, some impact from some economic indicators that we're beginning to see. And so there may be some other changes coming forward. I don't know the magnitude of those. Right now, the policy is if there is a change of a deficit of more than $5 million, that staff is to bring that to the CTB so that we can make a decision. And so I was speaking, given that there may be some unknowns coming our way, I was going to discuss, and I may ask just a few of you to meet with the Deputy Secretary and Commissioner to see if we should and could put together a policy, a task force about how we would deal with the potential risk that we could have going forward. So, Mr. Whitworth, I would definitely would want you to be a part of that, just so that this board is able to reasonably anticipate and deal with what the future holds.
Madam Secretary, we knew a year and a half ago it was going to be more than $5 million in this project.
I personally did not know that,
Well,
but
somebody did.
But now that we know that, we want to go forward and make it as transparent and be as smart as we can with the responsibilities that we have. Ms. DeTonk.
The policy, as I understand, per this resolution, as it stands today, is that the project will be rescored and evaluated. Why enhancements in the policy could be made, that's pretty definitive that it will be rescored. And until your comments earlier, we had not seen any of the rescoring and how it played out. So I think at the minimum, having that information in advance would be extremely helpful and beneficial to the evaluation as it currently stands. Because without that, it really negates the whole point of Smart Scale and what we're trying to do with the program. So thank you for providing that information this morning to us, but in advance would be helpful as well.
And Madam Chair, to the issues I've heard raised, just want to report back to the board. I think the three things that I'm hearing you want us to work on. One is just if we have a project that's been selected where a new risk has been introduced into the potential procurement there, some type of mechanism for feedback to make you aware of that in advance rather than receiving a bid 12 months after that has a problem, which would give you more time to prepare. I think a second thing that I've heard you, Mr. Tung, to your point, and Mr. Whitworth, to yours, is we have the policy that says when a project comes back to the board to be reevaluated. I think what you'd like to see is what is the information or other things that are provided to the board to allow them to adjudicate when a project that has crossed over that threshold and has come back to you. So, for example, getting these scores earlier, seeing them in advance, having them be there in the workshop rather than here at the action. And I think the third thing is looking at the risk factors just in general in our construction and our vetting of cost estimates for the Smart Scale process as they're coming in, so that we make sure we can try and catch more things even before we score it, so that when we're looking at that cost there, we have a higher degree of confidence in some of these potentially more at-risk projects of the cost estimate that's being used for the purposes of evaluation or Smart Scale, even before anything's selected for funding.
Mr. Donahoe, I would add Mr. Williams' point too, that what are the implications to the other projects and districts as we look at the
I would like to
score?
add just a couple more comments.
Yes,
briefly.
Mr. Williams.
Having been around a long time, seen a lot of bids come in. It's typically unsettling to some board members when the project estimate's off by 5%. Good gosh, it's supposed to be 10 million, it was 11.5. What'd you guys miss? Now we're faced with a project it should have been 100, but it's 200. And so, none of us have any way of anticipating that kind of comeback. So that, Mr. Whitworth's issue with, we should have known this a long time ago. But the one question I did want to ask is, who put the original project estimate on? I don't want anybody to squirm, but I mean, was it us, or was it the county, or was it our folks?
It was our folks.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to know, not
Yep.
because it's a problem with that, I just wanted to know where that miscalculation was, or really not, it's not allowing, they just didn't allow for a big issue.
We assume full responsibility.
Right, okay. So I'm fine. We need to know early.
And Madam Chair, to Mr. Williams' point, I think that that third point I made earlier about putting in some extra checks for certain types of projects in the smart scale process is getting directly at that point. So, and we've had several discussions about this since this issue came up. We were actually having an additional one this morning about follow-ups of how do we operationalize when estimates are coming in from the district for particularly projects over a certain size, what type of level of review happens at the central office just to create some tension in that process to make sure someone's asking a secondary question, particularly when we're dealing with projects of this size and scope where the magnitude of an error or a mistake or assumption that turned out to be wrong could be drastically greater than on a $3 million project or something else of that nature.
If I might add to recognizing that we're about to embark on another round of smart scale, we've been out to the localities, sent additional notifications on scope, schedule, and budget, reinforcing that fact that we have the tools, use our assistance in developing those estimates. We are going to go as soon as April or August 1st, once we get those final applications back in, starting the verification process with the district. So this is very important to us. I don't want another bust in an estimate such as this. This is embarrassing in my mind that we're $100 million potentially over the estimate that we had. It's not going to happen again.
Here's my comment, that if we'd have attacked it in the beginning and said, whoops, and rescored it, let it drift on down there, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that the Northern Virginia folks wouldn't have come to us and did the same thing they did the year before, which is we need to push these back and push this up. And we'd have all unanimously gone along with it, because it's what we typically want to do for a district that is you're coming to me and you're telling me it's more important than the ones that scored a little bit better. I'm gonna go along with that. As I have to. And that's what would have happened had we done it then. And then this money wouldn't be coming out of these other districts. We wouldn't be scrambling around draining our surplus in the high priority fund. We wouldn't be doing any of those things. There would have just been something in the Northern Virginia district that wasn't built.
Just like the first process.
Yes.
Exactly.
We bumped one
Agreed.
out and bumped one in.
Had we known, we'd have been
that's
the board.
I don't have any doubt that if we'd have known back then and identified it, these projects would still be getting built, because that's what we'd have done. But it would have come out of, a different pot of money than it's coming from now. So,
Mr. Dodson.
in hindsight,
Madam Secretary, just ask a couple of questions. So percentage-wise, how much is it over budget? I mean, I heard the dollars. What percentage-wise, Mr. Donovan?
I believe overall on the total construction cost, it's somewhere around 30%, 30 to 40%. And I'm using a range because otherwise I'll be more precise but less accurate.
And I guess the question, not at least as anybody, but so Washington Gas has this big project. We have this big project. So we didn't know that Washington Gas had the project, or it's just bigger than we thought that it was?
Mr. Dodson, again, I'm going to speak to my understanding is that at the time we scored the project, I do not believe we were aware that the gas line was moving forward, as was noted by the chief engineer previously. Somewhere along the process between when we spoke to you last month and when this project was selected, we were made aware of that. I think one of the things we are going to seek to do and come back to you on is recommendations where how we as staff provide more visibility to you all as board members about when new risk or other things are introduced to projects selected through this process.
Why wasn't y'all aware of a huge project of Washington Gas?
Mr. Dodson, I cannot speak to that. I don't know if it wasn't planned or if they did not communicate with us. What I will say, and there are others on this board who can speak to this better, utilities tend to have a fair amount of leeway in the actions that they take, particularly in the easements that they have. But I can also try and have folks look into that issue and come back to you at the next meeting.
For example, Mr. Donahue, how big is the project for Washington Gas?
I believe it's
how much?
$200 million.
So somebody in y'all's department didn't know a $200 million project for Washington Gas existed?
Madam Chair, Mr. Dodson, to be clear, you don't want me engineering or procuring anything. So I was not personally involved in that. My understanding, though, is at the time the project was selected, we were not aware of that. In between when it was selected and when the bids were submitted, we were made aware of that. I think as the chief engineer and commissioner both noted, we need to create a better feedback loop to you all. I think the point you may be noting is perhaps we need to have a better upfront coordination with some of the utilities as well on this issue.
It seems, and there again, I'm not being critical, Mr. Donahue, I just got here, of course, but somebody needs some peripheral vision. That's what's going on around.
Maybe Mr. Moore could answer
I
that
can
more
answer
clearly.
part of it, and this is not, I don't have an inside loop in Washington Gas, but as our understanding, they were on a federal mandate to upgrade their line. We did not know about that, and when they saw this project, they came to us afterwards, not immediately, but as we were getting ready to get this thing to go out to bid, and said we should do this at the same time. That actually is probably the best thing for the traveling public, for them to do it. We're in the same space, and we should, yeah. But it was not something that we understand they had planned before we went and did the scoring. Don't know what their internal works are.
So, Mr. Moore, to your point, it was not made public prior to this project being selected that project was going to go forward. And I just spoke with county representatives. They were similarly unaware of it. And again, I think we would all, Mr. Williams and I have had many discussions after these meetings about some of the interactions between contractors and utilities and how sometimes they work well and other times they work differently. And I think this is certainly an example of the latter, but I think it is not a good situation, as the commissioner said.
Madam Chair, I got a question for the Fairfax rep, just real quick. Thank you, we're unelected. Some of us have been elected in the past. How did elected board of supervisors feel about this issue?
Mr. Dotson, I would say that the board is not happy with the bids either, but the board recognizes that it is an important project to the county, and it is something that is necessary for the redevelopment and continued growth of Tyson's. And so while they were not, certainly not pleased with where we are either, they recognize that it was a difficult decision that they needed to make.
So y'all are split in half of what is needed additional.
That's the proposal, and hopefully you all will agree to that.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
A couple of things. One, it sounds like what happened here was that once we became aware that WGL wanted to, or was going to do this project, we then made a decision that it made sense to do it at the same time, which then forced the cost increase. Is that what happened? Because
I don't believe we made a decision to advance with this project, and my understanding, based on what Mr. Moore said, is they then made a decision to do theirs then. It's not that we did ours because they were doing theirs. I believe it was the opposite.
right, but what I'm saying is that the cost increase occurs because we're doing it at the same time.
Madam Chair, Mr. Brown, I believe to the points the commissioners raised is there are several factors that went into the cost increase here. The utility line is the one that we've spent the most time discussing, but I believe there are other factors dealing with the amount of work in this region, the unique nature of this project, and some peculiarities with this particular bid, its technical requirements, past estimates, and even the estimates that were then used in smart scale scoring. So, Mr. Brown, if you're asking me to identify what is the key sin in this, I will not pick one of those four. Okay. There are several.
That point's well taken. So here's what I want to say, Madam Chairwoman, is that I'm going to support this in echoing part because of what Mr. Williams said, that this was a project that ultimately the region came together and they said, look, this is our priority. And we've always said that smart scale does not make the CTB dumb because it's smart. We still ultimately have the responsibility to decide and prioritize these dollars and program these dollars, and that's the discretion that this board has reserved. But what I want to say is that I don't think that this should be deemed to be at all precedential, right? Because, but for the fact that this was a project that was uniquely programmed and substituted, if this had been a project that had merely scored, where the region had not come together in the same way, I don't know that I would be as supportive of this initiative, because it is taking away from a pool of statewide dollars, high priority dollars, that could have been used elsewhere. And because of the fact that the scoring process, although we know in this case, at least part of it would have still been funded, that's not always going to be the case. And so I'm going to be supportive because I think the region has spoken that they prioritize this. Fairfax County has stepped up, so they prioritize this. Again, things happen, but we just need to make sure that we don't assign this preferential value for future situations. Hopefully they don't occur, but if it does occur, I'm going to reserve, and I think other members of the board would probably reserve the right to decide differently.
Mr. Connor.
I just want to make a comment. I don't want to, we've never had closed sessions before, but I can't help but note that this is the second incident in Northern Virginia we've had this year with accountability issues. You all are new to your positions, but I don't know if this is a systemic problem. We're supposed to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and I've got to believe we need to hold somebody or something accountable. And I don't know how we had that discussion, but I think, again, this is the second incident we've had in Northern Virginia, not construction related.
Well, I'm not sure, well, okay, but I'm not sure what the first one was, but as far as smart
Snow
scale
removal?
and the bidding, well, that is being dealt with in a different way. But I'm just
Understand.
saying from a bidding responsibility,
It's a
from a
management
bidding
issue.
process.
It's a
Yes.
management issue.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's a management issue. And I think I guess we're accountable for those issues. And I'd like to show some accountability.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Kaspwitz, did you want to,
Well, I
since you're the
appreciate-
one remaining
Wrap it up.
person?
I appreciate all the comments made by other members of the board, Madam Secretary. And to Dixon's points, we don't have guidance on this. I think the initial work that we did was good, but we're now faced with making a decision with no criteria to guide our decision. I would suggest that one of the things we might consider would be the cost of delaying it to a future round of Smart Scale. And given that we're already in round 3 of Smart Scale, Gary, could you give us even a rough estimate of the differential in cost if we did wait to round 4 or perhaps round 5 to do this project?
It wasn't the entire project, but if you did the entire right-of-way and utilities and then did half the project, which would be closer to fitting in the budget, it would be just that second stage construction. Probably one estimate that I did back of the envelope, and we did a high and a low, came in a little bit over 80 in construction, a little bit under 100 all in. We had a very detailed outside estimate done, and when that was escalated for inflation for 6 years, construction came in about 100 million, and all in with CEI. There'll be additional right-of-way because things change in the meantime, so all in probably about 120. So that's kind of the low and the high.
That's an additional cost to what we
That's
face today.
additional cost, yeah.
So that would be a significant factor, I think, in decision criteria. What's it going to cost us when we finally do it? I guess the second comment I'll make is to Marty's point. This it's easy to forget the amount of work that we did on this early in the first round of Smart Scale. It was the biggest selection of something outside of the projects that had scored within the we're going to build it range. And I think we did come together as a board based on the local knowledge of the board members and make a good decision. This is a project that's, as Tom has said, is critical to Northern Virginia, especially the redevelopment of Tyson's Corner. It's going to be extraordinarily disruptive for 6 years. We're going to take the traffic and basically tie that area in a knot, even with our best efforts. Our goal at the outset was to not extend that to 12 years. And I think one of the things we should consider in this as well is what are the impacts of a delayed decision. And I will tell you in this case, the regional impacts will be very, very significant. To put that critical route through 12 years of construction or planning or right-of-way acquisition, I think will have a significant impact on that portion of the county and all of the counties west as well. So just a couple of comments. I appreciate the commentary and the discourse that's gone on this today. I do appreciate those who've said they're willing to support the resolution. It is a critical regional issue, and I think the staff has worked hard to come up with a solution to it. I do agree with Hap, though. I think we need more information on how this actually occurred, and specifically not only the reason that it occurred, but what we've done substantively to make sure that it doesn't occur again.
Mr.
Casper. I'll commit to coming back then in the September board meeting in identifying the root cause of the issues, as well as put together that presentation as to what we've done, certainly in the smart scale, and what we're doing moving forward to make sure that these estimates are accurate.
Further comments?
I will just close this before the vote that within a month of the commissioner and I learning of this, you all knew about this. And so we made sure that the board was aware that this issue had arisen. And, you know, the commissioner and I will commit that we will look at the underlying cause and that we will try to develop policies and strategies going forward, because this is not going to be the only issue that surprises us. And so we as a board want to be as transparent and accountable as possible. So I thank everyone for their comments this morning. We will find a better path forward. And so with that, do I hear a motion?
Motion to adopt the resolution, Madam Secretary.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Any abstentions? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I
Ms.
might
Hines.
ask, the thing that I have been thinking about a lot in the context of Smart Scale is the fact that we are actually funding things out in year 6, believing we have funded them all. And as people have noted today, we have varying amounts of risk associated with changes in the price of materials, et cetera. And when we did our Smart Scale allocation last year, one of the things our region did was decide not to spend almost $10 million worth of our district grant fund, partly worried because of the level of activity we knew we were going to have in Northern Virginia, that we would have some escalations outside of what could ordinarily be covered. Well, we've been proved right many times over that are holding back something. But I am struck by the fact that we don't have a reserve, that we don't have anything to sort of help us manage these situations. And so I guess my request is for you all to think about that a little as we head into Smart Scale, this next round of Smart Scale. I really just, you know, the 6-year plan was everything's real in the first year and then the out years are a plan. But as Smart Scale continues, we have more and more committed money in those out years. And I think that is just a risk overall to our construction program. And as much as I appreciate all the work around this particular project, I think that is the bigger looming question, and what is our strategy financially to manage that?
Madam Secretary, if I might respond a little bit, following up on our conversation earlier this week, there are two things that are happening that we're working on. One of which is certainly we are at an inflection point associated with bid prices. We're watching that go up very closely right now. That inflection point may be exacerbated based upon the tariffs that may be coming into place. We are working with the Research Council, Department of Taxation, and economists to be able to get our hands around what this may mean to us moving forward and what those cost estimates may be, how much risk is associated with it, because this is something that I don't want to continue to happen and bring back to the board, but there's some things that are completely outside of our control. This has some significant ramifications to what's in the 6-year plan today. Second point of this is we're also watching leading indicators that may be leading us to another recession within the next 12 to 18 months, maybe 2 years. We need to be prepared for that. So we're in the process of identifying where those indicators are, what we can anticipate seeing, and what our plan moving forward is. So we've got two things underway right now. Is certainly we're at that inflection point on cost estimates. Tariffs are going to hit us. When are those going to hit? What keeps me awake at night, quite honestly, is what's going to happen with the HRBT. We're in the threshold right now of having a generational project in the Hampton Roads area potentially be impacted by the tariffs and associated. We need to see that project move forward, hands down. So I think as we come in, probably into the fall, I'll have a better picture for you, and I think we need to brief you on what we're seeing, both on the tariffs, cost estimating, and then on what we think may impact on the recession side. So let me bring that back to you.
That is not an announcement. Just to make it clear, we're just trying to be, look ahead, yes.
And let me say,
Mr. Rosen.
to your point, and it's not steel and all that, but we've seen in our little area in Podunk, Southwest Virginia, construction prices are up 11%, lumber's up 19%. They're attributing 7% of the 19% to the tariffs. And so I don't know how that affects transportation, but that's a big delta when you're talking about.
There are a lot of unknowns right now, and we're trying to get our arms around those, and certainly we're in that initial point. How far it's going to go, I don't have that right now, and that's why we're working on it.
Which makes Mr. Whitworth's task force we're going to try to put together even more important.
No pressure.
Okay, now.
Finish the book.
Ms. Brown, come save us. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning. Madam Chairman, members of the board, I have one agenda item for you today. Action item number 2 is a request for economic development access funds. This request was submitted by Spotsylvania County, located in the Fredericksburg District. This project was originally presented last month. This proposed project provides access to property currently owned by the Spotsylvania Economic Development Authority. The county is planning to develop 48 acres, which currently does not have public roadway access. We have consulted with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership staff, and we've received support for the county's plans to attract qualifying business operations to this site. This is a bonded project, so we do not have details on the actual investment or jobs at this point. But VEDP has indicated that the property currently has infrastructure that would support industrial prospects. The required investment information will be required before VDOT releases the 5-year required bond for this project, and as indicated last month, the minimum investment required is $5 of investment for each $1 of access road funds provided. So for this project, they will be required to document investment of at least $3.25 million before we release their bond and their obligation for this project. On a broader note, as requested by the board, we have reached out to the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and requested them to accompany me at the September meeting, where I will be making a broader presentation on the Economic Development Access Program with a focus on the bonded program, and that will also include the Economic Development Partnership talking about their role with the Access Program. Back to this project, the project is requested. $854,000 is the estimated cost. Fredericksburg District has concurred in this estimate, and so the request is for the maximum allocation of $650,000. That's $500,000 that would be unmatched, and $150,000 that would be matched. We request your approval of this request for $650,000 for this Economic Development Access Project.
Mr. Connors.
Yes. I'm with Mr. Williams. This would be the last vote I take on this kind of thing until we have a briefing from VDP. I had a great conversation with the commissioner, and thank you very much. I think we have agreed that there needs to be another step in the process before this comes to the board. Mr. Whitworth and I discussed it last month. I think the requestor, not VDOT, but the requestor should brief the CTB member before he or she makes a vote on these kind of projects. I still have reservations about the project, about whether or not $500,000 is the best we can do in a 21st century economy to build a quarter-mile road for an industrial access park. Can that money be better spent on startups or other kind of economic drivers in this day and age? But one question I have, Julie, who makes up the $3.25 million? If they don't invest that much money, do they owe us 20% of the $500,000?
Essentially, so we have two types of economic development access projects. We have regular projects where the locality has already identified a business, and the amount of money that is made available is based on the specific investment of that particular business. And then we have bonded projects. For bonded projects, it's kind of the concept is build it, they will come.
Right.
So there is no business, and we will provide the funding for the project.
Front.
And the locality has 5 years to build the road and attract businesses that can document qualifying investment. And the current board policy is that the minimum return on investment is $5 to 1.
They owe us 20%. If they don't comply with these terms,
They would have to return the entire allocation, or it could be a partial reimbursement if they had partial investment.
who makes those terms? Do we make that or VDP?
VDOT does all the review. What VDP does is they actually qualify the business. So they have criteria that will determine whether or not it's a qualifying business. And what they're looking at is it a positive economic value to the Commonwealth? So as an example, if someone was simply shifting their operation from one place to another and there was no net economic gain for the state, they would not qualify that particular business. So they're looking at the overall benefit to the Commonwealth. And they will qualify that, yes, this meets our requirements, which are actually stated in the code, what typically would qualify. We typically are the ones that are reviewing the investment. We have certain things that we're looking for to document investment.
Thank you.
Is this not the program that Delegate Kilgore put the moratorium on clawing back the money a few years ago?
Yes, we currently have a moratorium on. So essentially, we still have bonded projects out there. And for those that currently have a bond, and we do have some where their 5-year period has expired. Currently, they're required to continue maintaining their bond, and while the moratorium is in place, we will not seek any reimbursement from them as long as they keep their bond in place.
So to the point of Mr. Connors on the 5-year, I mean, the 5 years really isn't, if they don't meet it in 5 years, if they bond the project, then we actually don't get the money back.
Moratorium will expire
When does that
before
expire?
it expires July of 2020.
They may well, I'm sorry, but they may well, if, like, I think Scott County, for instance, and there were a couple of them, but if, if they haven't gotten a qualifying project, I suspect that Senator Carrico will likely seek to extend that moratorium, so we actually, this could be, we could look at 2024, and if this isn't met, well, they bond it, and we actually don't get the money back.
And I do think that next month, I'll provide a presentation. We've gone back and looked at the history of our bonded program over 20 years. And, typically, we're only looking to document the investment within that 5 years and have they met that 5-to-1 ratio that we require. Looking at those bonded projects over 20 years, overall, those bonded projects, including those that had to repay all the money that we had provided, have netted about $4 billion in investment in Virginia. And so a lot of those projects, while they may not attract the businesses within the 5 years, many of those have proven to be very successful over time. And I'll be giving you much more detail on that next month.
Which I think
in
is
September.
important. And we had asked for an evaluation to actually go back and look, what is the real return from these investments that we're making? So, Mr. Williams, did you want to add anything?
No, other than, even if the moratorium went on, I think I remember it might have been my favorite rail access program that I'm referring to, and not this other program, but we've forgiven it by vote on the CTB. When they come back and say, well, we just didn't make it, but we don't want to pay it back. Okay. It's a terrible business for us to be in. I will never support one of these things, and I love you. You know that. I'll never support one.
Mr. Connor, so you are, the point you made early on in your remarks, though, of those businesses that are requesting these access funds, you believe should come and brief the CTB member?
I would, yes.
Okay.
I'd rather hear from, I don't think my VDOT district engineer is an economic development expert. I don't expect her to be or him to be. She's not requesting this money. Spotsylvania County is, their EDA is. They should be the one to come to us and brief us on the ROI, why this is important.
And the commissioner has spoken to me about that, and we do intend to include that in our process and communicate that to localities. But that would be an expectation that they're briefing their, in some districts, I think, the board member is well aware, and some,
And I will say, Mr. Dodson, in your district, you're always made aware of these things. So it was very natural for me. I didn't realize that other people were not being briefed.
The same comments would apply to rail enhancement.
Yes.
And that was been the issue I spoke to last month. There was a rail enhancement, and we need to know what it is and see it and support it. The same thing with economic enhancement. If we ask to make a vote on it and approve it, we have to understand it. And
Madam Secretary, and Ms. Mitchell and I did converse at the last board meeting, and certainly that was where the notion came up that any economic development access that's going to come through the department is going to be first vetted through the requesting party back to the board member, and not necessarily having the district engineer be the point of contact trying to relay that information. So certainly that's already a process that the rail enhancement program has in place. We're just going to follow suit, and Ms. Brown is already starting to change that procedure right now.
I'd like to comment also with regard to my good friend Marty. As I understand it, we have the responsibility by legislature to do this. So whether we like that or not, I think it is our responsibility to vote on it.
That responsibility.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion. I appreciate the commissioners, your phone call last month and your measured guidance, so thank you.
We'll do a motion. I'll ask for further comment.
To approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Any further comment?
Okay, this has nothing to do with the particular amount of baseball.
No, that's going to the city.
I just want to be sure we're advertising with on the conflict.
Oh, right.
Okay, with that clarification, all those.
One of the economic drivers on the shore for many years. It finds itself in harm's way at this point, to the extent that we need to break it up. And the best solutions are to be able to support the Delaware program on the northern end, 14.8 miles, and some other activities on the southern end as well. I know you hosted a meeting with the chair, or the chairs, if you will, of the two counties, and they're basically in support of this. I would recommend to the board that we proceed to move forward with this motion. There is economic development that's going to occur with this. Basically, in approximately 1,000 tractor rail car operator loads a year, and it's just very important for the entire Eastern Shore that this happen.
Is that a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
I know I'm on a roll, but no. For anybody watching for the first time, I rarely vote no. It looks bad today.
Thank you.
3 today, Marty.
I know. Mr. Moore, welcome back.
Morning again, Madam Chairman and members of the board. These should be two easy routine ones that are good for the department and the Commonwealth. One is they're both limited access. Let me talk about the first one. It's a limited access control change on Interstate I-81 at exit 245 northbound off ramp. It's a realignment in the city of Harrisonburg, located in Stanton District. And what it does is it widens the ramp out and actually lines it up with another road across from it. It is good for us, and it simply kicks out the right-of-way line, the limited access line a little bit. And I would recommend approval of the board.
Move.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
The second one is approval of a proposed limited access control change on Route 639. This is adjacent to the current 95 project, but it's on the 639 project going on there. Again, it involves limited access associated with I-95. There's reconstruction and widening in Caroline County, located in the Fredericksburg District, And what this does is allows for a right turn lane as you come off and it adjusts the alignment. Again, very routine, and it's good for moving traffic in the area, and I recommend approval of the change.
Honors.
To approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Donahue. You've been very busy this meeting. We're not even doing Smart Scale.
We have several months. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm here before you with the resolution that we discussed yesterday regarding the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund Guidelines revision. Again, as we noted, this is a very discrete and narrowly tailored change that would allow these funds to be used to support state transportation agency services. What we are really seeking here is just a slight delay in when the timing of the economic development comes in. If for whatever reason it does not come in, again, the state transportation agency would be locked out effectively of those funds until such time that they do meet the criteria laid out in the Commonwealth Opportunity Fund. There were some questions asked yesterday regarding the reporting requirements. I did want to go let the board know I reviewed the guidelines last night. There are already reporting requirements laid out in the guidelines that are a part of the grant agreement, so you don't see that in the Be It Resolved. And I think, Mr. Tunk, you may have been the one asking about that, but that is something that we put in every one of these grant applications, and it's currently spelled out in the guidelines. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a motion.
Madam Secretary, I noticed there's loan provisions in this as well as grant provisions. Do we have any outstanding loans in this program?
Madam Chair, Mr. Malbin, I do not know the answer to that. What I can say to you is we have not awarded any loans in the last 4 years and 7 months.
I'm assuming there is none.
I do not believe there are any, but I don't want to misspeak. I know for certain that none have been awarded in the last 4 years and 7
I
months.
have not been made aware of any either, so.
Madam Chairman,
Mr. Commissioner.
what I'd say is Laura Farmer's behind there, lurking back there and saying no.
She's right. She manages
And
this
can I
program.
tell you
the
that
department.
I could not see Ms. Farmer through you, so I did not know you were back there.
I wouldn't know how to take that next.
Well. Okay, with that, do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, Mr. Donahue. Mr. Moore?
Chair, I believe I have 2 items. I apologize.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Oh, I already crossed you out.
My
Sorry.
apologies.
Welcome back, Mr. Donahue.
Yes. Madam Chair, members of the board, the second resolution that I have before you this morning is one dealing with the safety performance targets. As we discussed yesterday, you all have asked us to move forward with a data-driven process that would really, I think, make Virginia's efforts unique among other states in this performance target setting arena. That, however, will take some time, and the federal government wants us to submit a target by August 31st and then again by October 1st. We will not be able to complete that data-driven process by that time, so we would like your approval of a target that we can submit to them to meet their reporting requirements with the proviso, which is in the resolution, that we will implement this data-driven process and come back to you in the near term with a target based on the process you've requested.
Secretary.
Mr. Whitworth.
I see the targets. Could you tell us how those targets relate to 2018 numbers?
Yes, sir. Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, those targets are based on a 5-year annual trend line for each of those 5 areas that are laid out. And so I believe for fatalities, that trend line brings you to 840. In 2017, we had 843 fatalities, so it's slightly lower on the fatality side. On the severe injury side, because we've seen things more flatline, I believe that target is slightly above what we saw previously in 2017. What I would say more generally, Mr. Whitworth, is they are more closely in line with what we experienced last year than with what a lot of other states are doing, where they're setting a 5-year rolling average, which would have, again, had us have to reduce 100 fatalities in 2018, which, based on where we are today, we do not believe is realistic, feasible, or appropriate to set as a target.
So what are the consequences if we don't reach a target?
Madam Chair, Mr. Whitworth, if we do not reach a target, One, this is the first reporting requirement we have had writ large this year for all of the performance measures. So again, there's safety, reliability, congestion, and environmental quality. For each of these, there are unique, different ones. For safety, the explicit thing is not that we meet the target, rather that we demonstrate significant progress towards the target, which is it's projected, not in this room, is a subjective determination that will be made by USDOT. They have some criteria they've laid out for it, but we haven't been subjected yet to their determination, which is why I call it subjective, anyone from USDOT who may be streaming this. And what happens then if we do not make progress target and their significant progress in their determination is that we must use the full amount of our highway safety improvement program on safety infrastructure projects. My understanding, to be corrected by the commissioner, is that we currently do that today. So the penalty is that we continue forth with the actions that we are currently doing.
Mr. Donahue is absolutely correct that we would have to use 100% of the HSIP funding back into infrastructure, which we are doing today. So there is no penalty associated with it.
Mr. Whitworth, if you're wondering why might that be set as a penalty if it's something that Virginia is doing, I would say we behave slightly differently than other states. There is some flexibility in federal law to move money between the 5 categories in which they distribute it for your use. Traditionally in Virginia, we have made a conscious decision to leave funding within those various categories with some certain exceptions from time to time. But some states, for example, might take their safety money and then go use it to widen a road or do some other purpose that's unsafety related using some flexibility in our federal code that we choose not to exercise.
We have
today.
better behavior.
Your words, not mine, sir.
Oh, wait a minute, Mr. Donahue. Yes, Mr. Whitworth.
I'm moving. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Are you done for the day, Mr. Donahue? Well, this morning. Mr. Moore.
Morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. What I'm bringing forward to you is a recommendation for a contract award on our single bid to bring forward. This is the one that we discussed the funding of just a few minutes ago. It's contract number C00099478 DB98. 2 projects, UPC 99478 and 106917. They're both Route 7, and you can see the numbers on your sheet in the packet. There were 3 bidders on this that were shortlisted. One of those, the bid did not go forward for price because of a low technical score. We did have 2 bidders that we accepted prices on. And in this particular project, we did go through a BAFO. We had original, and then we moved things down to best and final offer. That brought some of the cost down, but in this particular one, the technical score of the winning bidder was high enough that it was about $6 million over the low bidder. And we accept technical scores, we score them independently, then we do price. That keeps integrity in the process. But I just wanted that to be known for everybody so that, yes, sometimes it is nice to accept the lower bid, but we have a very good process with integrity to it, and we need to do that to keep getting good bidders and reasonable prices. I would say that even though we've had to add money, the companies you've had involved in this are well known, including the one that did not go all the way through, and the 2 that were in there, some of the better companies in the Commonwealth. So I would say that these are fair value, given the market conditions and the risks involved. And in my discussions with the 2 teams afterwards, I would say that they put an awful lot of effort into this, and I would be able to forward that despite whatever happened with us, in other words, that they did their best to give us fair value. The other thing that is in your packet, but I'm not bringing forward, is a second, or maybe is that we had an option to go with a lesser option of this if you had decided not to fund the money, but we're coming with you with the full option to do this and award it as such. So that's where we're at with it, and my recommendation is to award this project at this time.
Motion to approve.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? And that's all we have? Okay. With new business, Mr. Connors, do you want to just let people know about the hackathon today?
Well, I just want to thank you, basically. We've been talking about this for some time, doing this with the data that we have, and with your leadership as secretary, you have really advanced this. I want to thank Virginia and Rob Carey and now Lynn and Lindsay and Shannon for publicizing it and all the work that the other staff are doing. So it's today at 1776 in Crystal City. It's ongoing right now, right? They were on TV this morning.
Yes.
And we're going over there after this, and whoever can come, I would advise you to come, because we can replicate this around the state. Everybody has a community college, everybody has a university, everybody has a high school in their district, and every one of those students and entrepreneurs can participate in these hackathons. And I think these hackathons provide us with an opportunity to look for new economic development opportunities, and also to rebrand VDOT as a cool place to work. No offense to civil engineers, but you don't have to be a civil engineer to work at VDOT anymore. You can be a data scientist, you can fly drones, you can be an expert in cybersecurity. So I think this has many, many possibilities, and I appreciate your leadership and everybody's work in making it happen. So thank you.
Well, and I think everyone on this board knows that Hap Connors has certainly been a true leader in leading technology and innovation. So I'm very happy to partner with you, and I'm very excited to go to the hackathon this afternoon, and I hope to hear the presentations, and so we'll have to report back at the next meeting to see how it goes. Is there any other new business from the board? Then I will close with this thought that the meeting today, the discussions, the comments that were made, I do believe demonstrate why this is such an important board, and why I appreciate everyone on here. And we always look to try to do things better, and and those are the partners that I want to have. So thank you all very much. And with that, adjourn.
See everybody. Yeah, I'll be seeing you soon.